Before Bernie Madoff, before Faze clan, before crypto networks ran off with people's coins, and before Jay Mazzini, there was a con artist who eclipsed all of these modern day scammers. A scammer who would put these new scammers to shame. Ladies and gentlemen, in this video I want to tell you the story of Gregor MacGregor, who pulled off history's most disturbing, greatest and infamous scam. And as always, watch this video all the way through because it's a hell of a ride, and believe me, you don't want any spoilers. Gregor MacGregor was born on Christmas Eve 1786 in Glengyle, Scotland, to a prominent Scottish clan, the Clan Gregor. Now, the Clan Gregor was one of the more famous Highland clans and had a real sense of former glory. They had supported the Jacobite risings against the British Crown and were deemed such a threat that they had only been recently allowed to use their real surname. That's right, they actually got banned from using their name. In 1803, Gregor MacGregor joins the British Army at a decent cost of £900. He becomes a captain. Now, I won't hold this against MacGregor. Purchasing commission was a common practice at the time. People with money generally bought their way into officer positions rather than work their way up. However, early in his fledgling military career, MacGregor begins to rub people the wrong way. He develops this kind of reputation for being the officer that is obsessed with uniform, insignias and all of that kind of stuff, like medals and everything. In fact, by some accounts, he forbade any man to leave his quarters in anything less than full dress uniform. Things come to a head during his time in Portugal, where a trivial disagreement with a superior officer causes him to immediately resign from the British Army and return home. What is interesting here is that the unit he was in, the 57th Foot, would go on to be immortalized in the Battle of Albuera. They would be given the nicknames the Diehards, and this is something that MacGregor, as we'll see later on, is very keen to associate with, even though he left the regiment a year prior to the battle. Now, out of the army, MacGregor then seeks to build a kind of personal brand, and the best way to do this was to be seen by the influencers of the time, the high British society. He first assumes the title of Colonel and rides around a brightly coloured coach in Edinburgh wearing the badge of the Portuguese Knightly Order. This sadly fails to impress anybody, so he then goes to London. There he does create a reputation of respectability by claiming to be the chieftain of the MacGregor clan, which by the way was false, and also alluding to family ties with a selection of dukes, earls and barons. Nothing impresses us Brits like a good family name. However, after MacGregor's wife Maria dies, so does his main source of income. So he was getting his income from Maria's family, which is very rich. Faced with little hopes of rejoining the British Army, he does something quite unexpected and exceedingly adventurous. MacGregor notices that the fight for Venezuelan freedom from the Spanish is getting more and more popular support in London. After all, at this time, everybody hates the Spanish. He hops on a boat and heads to the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Hopefully he can return a hero. MacGregor's time in South America could be a book unto itself. And to be fair, he is credited with some great victories in helping the Venezuelan rebels against their Spanish oppressors. In one instance, MacGregor and a small force of Venezuelan rebel archers are retreating from a numerically superior force of Spanish cavalry, and they're retreating towards Barcelona. Deploying in the marsh, his archers counterattack and sweep the Spanish cavalry with arrows while they're stuck in the marsh and bogged down. The arrows rain upon them and the Spanish cavalry are routed. This victory led General Bolivar to say in a letter, quote, "The retreat which you had the honor to conduct is in my opinion superior to the conquest of an empire. Please accept my congratulations for the prodigious services you have rendered my country." And then, of course, there is the Emilia Island affair. Essentially, MacGregor raises several hundred men and captures the port of Emilia Island in Florida, which at the time was controlled by the Spanish and essentially is an island full of local pirates. Fighting the Spanish commander, he quickly overruns the defending force without much of a fight and announces it the Republic of Floridas. Sadly though, his popularity and his triumph is short-lived. First, he charges an unpopular tax on the local pirate booty, and then the Spanish return with an even greater force to retake the island. MacGregor then promptly leaves the island to an angry crowd hurling insults at him, and there he lands in Nassau, where he has commemorative medallions made bearing the inscription "Emilia Veni Vidi Vici," translated "Emilia, I came, I saw, I conquered." I hope he did not read the rest of Julius Caesar's story. Next to MacGregor's South American adventures was the infamous Portobello affair. Now, if you're like me, you may have wondered what it would be like to run your own island. And I think that Gregor MacGregor probably had this idea as well, because in 1818, he sets off once again to the Americas, this time with his eyes firmly set on Portobello, Panama. Of course, the first thing you need here is funds, so he raises £1,000 from a London financier and, well, he quickly squanders it in less than a week. But nonetheless, an old friend comes to his rescue and backs his debts and allows MacGregor to raise a private army of mainly Irish troopers. About 500 of them set sail, and on the way, mutiny almost breaks out because, well, you guessed it, he doesn't pay any of them. Nonetheless, the acting commander, Colonel William Rafter, manages to convince the troops that everything will be all right in the end, so they continue on their merry voyage to capture Portobello from the Spanish. On the day of invasion, MacGregor waits on the boat like any great officer and sends Colonel Rafter and 200 men to seize the port in the dead of night. Astonishingly, they walk in without a fight and quickly overtake the town from sleeping Spaniards. Seeing Colonel Rafter's signal of victory, MacGregor then visits the shore and proclaims, "Soldiers, our first conquest has been glorious. It has opened the road to future and additional fame." However, sadly, after only 3 weeks, the Spanish retake the port in a nighttime attack, which again is a hilarious story because it's said that MacGregor, awoken by the fighting in the dead of the night, flings his bed and blankets from his window onto the beach below, jumps out the window, and then swims to his ship called the Hero. However, swimming to the ship, he faints in the water and would have drowned at this point, but is rescued by the boat's captain. Meanwhile, Colonel Rafter and 200 men are fighting it out with the Spanish, laying volley after volley, when they see that MacGregor hoists his standard above the boat, the Hero. Excellent. Colonel Rafter expects supportive fire from the ship, but to his astonishment sees MacGregor and the Hero set sail and abandon his troops on Portobello. Colonel Rafter and his troops are abandoned, forced to surrender and live a miserable existence in Spanish captivity before being shot. But where MacGregor's legend really shines is in the next chapter of his life, which to me is probably one of the most unbelievable, remarkable stories I have ever read. In 1820, a 34-year-old Gregor MacGregor trades rum and jewellery in exchange for a huge amount of land owned by King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito people in Honduras. And this guy is really a king in name only, so this was a title given to basically chieftains by the British to avoid the Spanish basically taking over the land. Now, this was an area the size of Wales, although it was largely barren and really not fit for any cultivation or livestock. So MacGregor has this huge piece of land and he calls it Poyet, after the local natives. MacGregor then returns to London and pronounces himself the Cazique of Poyet, in other words, the chief of Poyet. And most importantly, that Poyet was looking for settlers and investment. And to say MacGregor does a hard sell would be an understatement. MacGregor appears in interviews in national newspapers. He writes adverts, leaflets, and creates songs of Poyet to be sung in the streets of London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. The water of Poyet, he says, is so pure that it could quench any thirst, and as if that wasn't enough, chunks of gold lined the riverbeds. The trees overflowed with fruit, and the forests teemed with game. And in fact, the country of Poyet was so fertile that there were 3 maize harvests a year. He also says that there is a democratic system of government, a civil service, and even a military. This starts to circulate around British society, and for the most part, people are entirely unaware of MacGregor's past affairs in South America. For all they know, MacGregor had been named part of this esteemed 57th Foot, the diehards, and had won some victories in South America. Now, for investors in the early 1820s, the prospect of high-yield foreign investments was quite tantalizing. Britain had just defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo, and the economy was growing and money was available to invest. At the time, interest rates were low and government bonds only yielded 3% per annum on the London Stock Exchange. Instead, you could invest in the paradise of Poyet, which, according to the Sketch newspaper, had rivers which contained, quote, globules of pure gold. For the price of a day's wages for the working man, so 2 shillings and 3 pence, you could get an acre of Poyetian land. Thanks to high demand, this price then goes up to about 4 shillings without demand slowing down. 500 buyers buy land, with many investing their entire life savings. And in addition to the land certificates, MacGregor also starts selling Poyet government loans on the London Stock Exchange. And about £200,000 worth are underwritten by a respectable London bank. Gregor MacGregor becomes, to quote a 21st century financial analyst, the founding father of securities fraud. And for potential settlers, Poyet seems to be a land of great opportunity. So MacGregor deliberately targets fellow Scots, and he was right in assuming that they would be more likely to trust a fellow Scotsman. He said that the Scottish people possessed the necessary hardiness to develop a new country, and this was almost their destiny and their chance to restore Scottish pride against the English. In the end, hundreds of Scots sign up to emigrate to Poyet on 7 different ships. The voyage is about to begin. The first ship to set sail is called the Honduras Packet, and it's led by an ex-British Army officer, Hector Hall. The party includes 70 emigrants, including a City of London banker named Morga, who was to head the Bank of Poyet, doctors, civil servants, and young men whose families had bought commission for them to serve in the army. Also on the boat was a cobbler from Edinburgh who would become the official shoemaker to the Princess of Poyet. Of course, the one person who is not on the boat of the Honduras Packet is Gregor MacGregor, who waves the ship off from London on the 10th of September 1822. A second ship, Kennersley Castle, with another 200 emigrants, also departs on the 22nd of January, hoisting the flag of Poyet. In 1822, the first ship of emigrants reaches the shores of Poyet. Assuming that the Poyetian authorities will come to pick them up, they set camp on the beach, but nobody turns up. The emigrants send search parties inland, but they only find rubble and ruin. Hector Hall, the leader of the first boat, immediately realizes that he and the rest of the emigrants had been duped by MacGregor. But he also realizes that he cannot sound the alarm, else cause a massive panic amongst the party. So they set camp, and Hector Hall basically appeases the group as best as he can for a number of weeks. And this may have been a critical mistake, because sometimes later a storm breaks out which causes the captain of the Honduras Packet to abruptly sail away and basically abandon the emigrants alone on the shore. They were now entirely on their own. And if things couldn't get any worse, in March 1823, the second boat of 200 emigrants arrives from Kennersley Castle, which astonishingly drops off the emigrants and sails away immediately. For these emigrants, their hopes are quickly again extinguished as soon as they arrive on the island, only to find that Poyet is a fake land really, with nothing, barren of anything. Quoting Alfred Hasbrouck, disease seized upon them and spread rapidly. Lack of proper food and water and failure to take requisite sanitary precautions brought on intermittent fever and dysentery. Whole families were ill. Most of the sufferers lay on the ground without any protection from the sun. Many were so weak as to be unable to crawl to the woods for the common offices of nature. The stench arising from the filth they were in was unendurable. James Hastie, a Scottish lawyer who had brought his wife and 3 children with him, later wrote, quote, "It seemed to be the will of Providence that every circumstance should combine for our destruction." The Edinburgh shoemaker, who was promised to be the royal shoemaker to the Princess of Poyet, shot himself. In May 1823, the Mexican Eagle, a ship carrying the chief magistrate of Belize, Marshal Bennett, discovers the settlers. Bennett informs the settlers that, Poyet doesn't exist, and he then rescues all of them except 40 who are too weak to make the trip to Belize. Of the roughly 250 emigrants who had sailed on the Honduras Packet and Kennersley Castle, at least 180 died. Fewer than 50 would ever return to Britain in their lifetimes. Back at home, just before the survivors return to London, MacGregor flees the capital. He flees to Paris, and unbelievably, he tries to do the entire Poyet scheme again. News of the fraud was spreading rapidly, and MacGregor does what any great con artist would do. He plays the victim, and he shifts the blame to Hector Hall, claiming that he too had been defrauded, and he then also sues survivors, who try to speak out about expeditions, and their accusations against him also then blame Colonel Hall for failing the mission. And unbelievably, the French believe him. MacGregor sells 500,000 acres of Poyet land and begins gathering French emigrants, selling 30 new Poyetian passports and preparing a new ship, once again getting ready to venture into this tropical death trap of Poitiers. However, the French authorities soon get suspicious of all of these new passports being issued to a country that they've never heard of, and they shut down the boat. The emigrants gradually disperse without their money, but with their lives. In 1826, Gregor MacGregor is acquitted of fraud and set free, where he moves back to London. There, amidst the economic downturn, the people have now forgotten about his ill-fated Poitiers expeditions, and in fact, for the next 10 years, MacGregor continues to sell land certificates and bonds to investors, although thankfully, no more ships set sail to Poitiers. David Sinclair, author of The Land That Never Was, says that at this point it was clear that Poitiers had had its day. The prices of the land certificates were going down, and in the end, quote, some investors had begun to understand that they were being fleeced. Gregor MacGregor's wife, Josepha, dies in Edinburgh on May 1838, and after this, MacGregor sets sail for Venezuela, where he lives out the rest of his days. He dies in his home on the 4th of December, 1845, and was buried with full Venezuelan military honors. Obituaries in the Caracas press told of his, quote, heroic and triumphant retreat from Barcelona in 1816, and described him as, quote, a valiant champion of independence. In Scotland, at the MacGregor family graveyard, the clan memorial stones make no mention of Gregor MacGregor or the country he invented. In Honduras, the area where Poitiers was said to be, well, that area still remains undeveloped to this day. The story of Gregor MacGregor is probably one of the more unbelievable stories of fraud, conning, and downright criminal behavior I have ever heard. There are so many questions I have to ask myself here. Was Gregor trying to reclaim family prestige, to bring the Gregor clan name back into the light? Was he trying to immortalize his own name? Was he doing it all for just a quick buck? Tamar Frankel, a professor at the Boston School of Law, says that, to some degree, MacGregor probably believed his own story and genuinely hoped to forge a Parisian society. Whatever reason, I guess the lesson here is that, of course, if something sounds too good to be true, like if somebody offers you to be a royal shoemaker or a baron of a new country, you better not buy any land certificates or get on the boat. Well, that's it for this video, and I would like to thank our sponsor, the new democratic government of Poitiers, who are now offering high-yield bonds and are looking for royal YouTubers. So until then, I will see you next time.